Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Buddhish. As you can see, I am back a lot earlier than I previously thought, and that will be part of the topic for today's Buddhish. We'll be talking about my Shikoku pilgrimage cut short, and a little bit about a laptop explosion as well.
Yep. So, laptop explosion. Between recording, the little hey things have changed, and now my old laptop exploded. It's got a shorted wire, it's unsalvageable. I am currently working on a new one that is not nearly as powerful as the one that died. So, yeah, just been some unfortunate happenings all around here. If things sound different, it's because I'm working on different hardware now.
Hopefully we won't notice that too much, but luckily you at least have something to work on and you're not sort of left high and dry without anything at all.
Yeah, gonna miss video games on that thing. This one is not strong enough to run Doom and the like, but it's strong enough to run Pixel games, and it's strong enough to edit the podcast, so I'll get over it.
So on to the main topic for today, the Shikoku pilgrimage. So I was thinking that I would just give a sort of brief day-by-day narration of my trip and what happened on it and why it ended early, but why it still was fantastic and why I intend to go back and finish the pilgrimage later. So on March 25th, I left from Seattle for Tokyo, and on the 26th, I left from Tokyo to Tokushima. These were two different plane rides. Japan's a lot bigger than most people think, and so to get from one region in the far north or far south of Japan, you have to take another flight from Tokyo to get there. And so I flew from Tokyo. It was about a 2-hour flight to get to Tokushima. And from there, it was a little bit longer, short car ride to get to my first inn that I was staying at before I started the pilgrimage. I was exhausted and jet lagged and in very bad spirits from the 10-hour flight to Tokyo, the 2-hour flight to Tokushima, and the 1.5-hour drive from Tokushima airport to the place where I was staying.
Yeah, that would be exhausting.
Yeah, it was a gauntlet for sure. I stayed overnight at a hotel near Haneda Airport before going to Tokushima the next day, and that helped a little bit, but it was just rough. It was really rough. And then I went to the inn. I was lucky enough to stay at an inn called Kanbai Inn, which is run by this wonderful married couple, the Goto family, I believe they're named, and they were super hospitable, super nice. The facilities were very traditional and monastic, I might say, and the food was wonderful, homemade food, and that immediately sort of changed and lifted my spirits as I was going along. I just felt immediately better once I got to that spot. This place is about, I would say, in metric, it's measured out as 400 meters from temple number 1. So, I mean, that's a really short walk. That's only 1,200-ish feet. So it was super close by. So I stayed there overnight, and I ate dinner and breakfast there. Wonderful, wonderful traditional Japanese food. Lots of seafood, lots of vegetables, lots of pickled foods, lots of mushrooms. It was wonderful food. So I had a very restful time there and felt a lot better getting started on my trip. As you heard in the last Buddhish episode, I packed like a backpacking sort of pack with just a couple of changes of clothes, a first aid kit, some toiletries, and some resources for getting around on the pilgrimage and getting around Japan. I used a pocket Wi-Fi device so that I could have internet the entire time that I was there on my phone. I wouldn't have to hop between, Wi-Fi service at like coffee shops or whatever, or restaurants. So I had Wi-Fi and cell signal the entire time I was there. And day one, my plan was to walk 12 miles, I believe it was. It was actually 12 and a half miles to go from temple number 1 all the way through temple number 7. And once I got started on the walk, even more my spirits lifted. I could tell sort of that the trip was starting and it was getting going in earnest, and my jet lag was going away, and I was feeling physically a lot better because I had eaten well and slept well. And I really enjoyed the temples that day. It was a little bit of a quiet day. I didn't meet very many people on the road for a couple of reasons. One reason is that it was a weekday that I was starting. It was a Thursday, I believe it was. So it wasn't really a popular day for a lot of Japanese people to get started. Usually they would start on like a Friday or like a weekend day. It's just more convenient with their work schedules and their regular lives that way. So not very many people were out on the road. But I did meet this really interesting couple from South Africa. They were in their late 30s, early 40s, and they spoke English. And so, naturally, we sort of gravitated toward each other. They were staying at Kanbayan as well. And so I got out a little bit earlier than they did. So I kind of pulled ahead of them for most of my trip. But I did bump into them at temple numbers 1 and 2. So we did see each other then. And they fascinated me because they weren't on the trip. They weren't doing the pilgrimage for any sort of religious reasons whatsoever. They had done El Camino in Spain, and they found this other pilgrimage, I guess through internet research or through books or whatever, and they thought, let's just go do that one. And so that was fantastic. I thought it was a really cool and interesting thing that this sort of retired South African couple, or maybe not retired, maybe just wealthy or, on vacation, in a stage in their lives when they can pick up and go walking for many, many days, weeks, they just were doing religious pilgrimages. I thought that was fantastic.
It's a good way to see a lot of cool architecture, I suspect. Any kind of religious pilgrimage that is going to specific temple sites or specific holy sites is just going to be interesting sightseeing aside from any religious significance.
Absolutely, yeah. And, that was part of the reason I was going too, was for the architecture. And they were also big hikers, big walkers. And so they were there for the experience of hiking through Japan as well. And so we had a good time talking with each other for a short segment of the trip. But they were moving a little bit more slowly. They were a little bit older. And so, and it was two of them versus just me by myself. So I sort of outstripped them and went a little bit further on the first day than they went. That day, I went, like I said, from temples 1 through 7. And as the day got sort of later, it became, 11 or 12, 1, 2 p.m. I started to see more people out, especially a lot more Japanese people. And I started to sort of be encountering the same people at the temples as I went. So I would lose people on the road, which was it's very common to sort of lose people on the road unless you're in a group that's like sort of all walking together. But then because you spend about 25 to 30 minutes at each temple, that's a big window for someone who's lagging behind a kilometer or two to sort of arrive and catch up to you, or for you to catch up to them. So around the environs of temple number 4, I met a Japanese guy named Takuto, who he is, I believe, about to turn 19 actually next month. And we walked from right after 4 through 7 because we were staying at the same place, and we just chatted about all kinds of stuff. And he was a really fun and interesting guy to sort of walk and talk with. I admit there was a bit of a language barrier because I'm really good at Japanese, but I'm not fluent. But we were still able to have conversations and hang out and get to know each other a little bit. One thing that was really sort of enjoyable about walking with him was that we both really liked the video game Monster Hunter. And so, we were both talking a lot about Monster Hunter Wilds. He's a Charge Blade main, and because Monster Hunter Wild lets you get a secondary weapon, he is also a Sword and Shield secondary. So I thought that was really cool.
Likes good shields then. I'm also a Charge Blade main, and that is a very fun shield to use. I prefer Lance over Sword and Shield, but anyway, it's always fun to meet a fellow gamer randomly out in the world that is into the same kind of thing. Like, that's just an instant way to bond.
Absolutely, yeah. And we talked a lot about how, Sword and Shield got such a big sort of boost in Wilds, and we talked about our favorite monsters from World and from Rise and Wilds and stuff like that. So that was really fun. He lives in Tokyo, and he was only doing a portion of the trip. He wasn't doing the whole thing in one go like I had planned to do. And, after we got sort of through talking about Monster Hunter and about his favorite foods and about places in the world that he wants to travel and about what he wants to do when he gets out of school and all this other stuff, we finally sort of got to the point where we were asking each other, why are you on this trip? Why are you taking this pilgrimage? And, that seems kind of like a very personal question and seems like a very, I don't want to say intrusive question, but it's sort of like asking somebody why they go to church. And, when you don't know somebody very well, that can be kind of an anxious question. But when you're on the road together and you're doing the thing and you're going to each temple and you're writing the names of your ancestors on cards and offering them up to the Buddha, you sort of are in a very personal and vulnerable place with a lot of other people, and it's kind of a shared experience. And so it's not that weird to ask that question of each other and have that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, you're on the same road, so there's obviously going to be something like that going on. So I feel like that's a pretty, it is a personal question, and I would have no qualms with somebody who chooses not to answer, but it also seems like a reasonable question. Like, this is not a usual thing to do. Why are we doing this? Like, that is a valid question, I think.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And I also don't blame him for asking me the question first, because I'm a white American guy on the trip.
Yeah, that's true.
And I bet that entire day he had not seen another white American guy, because I didn't see any other white European, white American people. I had only seen ostensibly Japanese people, but potentially any sort of East Asian people on the trip that day so far. And so he's like, what are you specifically doing here? Not in a judgmental or sort of territorial way, but just like, Curiosity, right? And so I explained to him in broken Japanese as best as I possibly could. I was sort of like, well, I'm a Buddhist in Seattle, but I also am a scholar of Buddhism, and I also want to see all of the architecture, and I want to do all this and see all this and feel all this. And so as far as I could tell, he sort of understood that and made sense of that. But then I asked him why he was here too. And I got a really fantastic answer. His grandmother was 93 years old or somewhere thereabouts, and she was unable to walk very far at this age. And, in America, whenever Americans get very old, it's like, oh yeah, of course, they can't walk. But that doesn't mean that like they're about to die, right? It like people can be in a state when they're very old in America where it's like, oh, I can't walk 10 miles a day, obviously, but I still have 20 years left. I still have 30 years left, even potentially. Well, because Japan has so much more of a culture of walking places and not driving, and they have a culture of not sitting around so much. They have a very much more active lifestyle in general, especially in the cities. There's sort of this understanding culturally that when someone stops being able to walk very much, it's because they are actually pretty soon to start deteriorating in health and potentially, start passing away soon. And so, he said that his grandmother couldn't walk, but because she was near the end of her life, she couldn't go on the pilgrimage herself. And so he sort of just elected to do it for her. And so he was, at every temple you visit, you get a card named an ofuda in Japanese, and you write the name of yourself and your ancestors on the card and offer it to the Buddha, offer it to Kukai along the way. And that's just sort of part of the regular ritual that you do if you choose to at each temple. But he wasn't writing his name on these cards. He was just writing hers. So his plan, his idea at age 18 was to do this for her near the end of her life. So he was going to break it up into several different trips, but his whole idea was he's generating merit for her because she's nearing death. It's not for him, it's sort of transferred through to her.
We've talked about merit transfer in previous episodes. Like, that is absolutely in line with what the doctrines say to do. And that is also, like, every step of that is a lot of merit for everyone involved. So yeah, this dude seems real cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talk about like merit transfer, and I understood merit transfer and how it's supposed to work mechanistically in Buddhism, but seeing him actually do this, like meeting a person who actually was like on the way to doing this, that was incredible. I was just like, wow, this is actually like a very deep and very sort of pious and very like familial person that is doing this. And it's not because they believe in the Buddha that hard, right? Like, it's not, oh, this is an expression of my faith. This is an expression of my belief that the Buddha's got my back. I asked him, like, do you go to a temple regularly in Tokyo? And he said, no. Does your grandmother go to a temple? He said, no. And so it wasn't an expression of like faith and devotion to Buddhism like we might see in America or the West with a Christian and Christianity. It was more so something that he was doing to sort of generate positive momentum for his grandmother as she entered what he understood to be her next life. And it was way more real for me in that moment than it had ever been before. It wasn't like it wasn't real before. It's just that seeing him actually doing this without even really thinking twice, without even really sort of wearing that on his sleeve, so to speak, it was an unimaginable experience that left me speechless. I almost cried in the moment, sort of thinking about that and understanding that, and sort of digesting how he was, not thinking of himself in that moment. He was thinking of his family. He was sacrificing his own time, his own effort, his own energy, his own resources for the sake of his grandmother. And so that was fantastic. I really enjoyed meeting him, and we actually got each other's contact information and have kept in touch since I left early. And so that was fantastic. It was wonderful to meet Takuto and get ice cream with him and talk about his family, talk about Monster Hunter, and walk together to where we were staying.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Like, the difference between studying something and reading about it and thinking about it from a conceptual level is a whole lot different than experiencing it. And like, that was a direct experience there. So like, yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad you got to get that kind of experience. And yeah, this good dude seems cool. It's too bad that internet connection between here and Japan is not good enough. I would love to play Monster Hunter with this guy sometime.
Yeah, I would too. Yeah. And hopefully that infrastructure sort of grows and improves. And if not, we still are able to keep in touch.
Yeah.
And so that day we stayed at temple number 7 in what is called a shukubo, which I mentioned last episode is a lodging where you stay at the temple and the services are taken care of by volunteers or by sort of employees of the temple itself who work directly under the head monk. This place was called Hotel Komyo Kaikan, which I thought was actually a fantastic name. So Komyo is the light mantra, Komyo Shingon. If you remember on a previous episode, sometime there was some disaster that had taken place. And at the end of it, I chanted the light mantra, the Komyo Shingon, for the people who were affected by that. That's the mantra that went, O Nabokyabe Roshano Makaboda Ramani Handoma Jinbara Harabari Taya Un. And so Komyo Kaikan translates to something like the place where the Komyo Shingon is transmitted, or where it's chanted, or where it opens up. And so that's kind of a fantastic name for a place to stay. I thought it was great. And so we stayed in kind of like hotel style lodgings at that temple, again with food provided, which again was fantastic food. The whole time I was there, I ate a lot of fresh fruit, a lot of pickled ginger and pickled cucumber. I ate a lot of mackerel and a lot of salmon and a lot of other varieties of Pacific fish that I don't really know the name of, but they frequently eat in Japan. Lots of rice, lots of miso, very sort of like traditional Japanese style set meal. situation. So they would bring out platters that would have rice and slices of orange and some kind of protein and a salad and miso soup and pickles and stuff. So I ate a lot of really fantastic food that way. I also ate a lot of tempura as well. And so slept well, ate well there. And then I set off the morning after with the intention of doing 8 through 11. And I was going to stay in the environs generally of temple number 11, or was it 12? I think it was 11. And so that morning, I felt a little bit sore, because I had walked so much the previous day, but it wasn't that bad at all, especially in the morning. I was able to set off and not really have any trouble. I got away earlier than Takuto. I just, for some reason, felt like going really early, like the previous day, probably because of the jet lag. I was waking up around 5 or 6 naturally. And so, I would be fed and out the door by 7:30 at the latest. And then, that sets me up at the first temple, within an hour or so of leaving. The weather the whole time I was there was pretty fantastic. It sprinkled on me a little bit on the third day, but the rest of the time it was partly cloudy and like 55 to 65. And so I never got so hot that I was like sweating and dehydrated and just having a bad time. But I was also never so cold that, everything hurt and I was sort of underprepared with layers. That never happened. So on the second day, I go from 8 through 11. I see tons of cherry blossoms because it's cherry blossom season in the south of Japan right now. And so I'm taking pictures just the whole way through because, they were really gorgeous, really gorgeous. They have these trees at the temples themselves that, just accentuate the buildings and are really gorgeous. And it was already crowded with pilgrims, but also with like the public taking pictures with the cherry blossoms and stuff too. So I was really glad to see those. I have always wanted to see the cherry blossoms in Japan, as basic of an aspiration as that may be. And I was able to see them in sort of a fantastic way that I don't think I could ever, or anybody could really replicate again, right? Because it was on pilgrimage. And so it was fantastic to see those. So on that day, I went to 8 and 9 with no event, nothing special happening. But then at temple number 10, that's kind of when everything started to go wrong. So temple number 10 is named Kirihataji, and it is at the top of a 2-kilometer hill. And it's also at the top of this 2-kilometer hill. To get to the temple itself, you actually have to go up 333 stone steps. And so these are not like the steps you might have in your house. These are like 8 or 10 inch, really steep stone blocks that have been there for hundreds of years. And there's railings and stuff, like it's safe, but you have to walk up those steps after you've already been walking at this point for 3 or 4 hours. And, there were some people on the trip who were like very old, right? Some pilgrims who were very old, who it took their whole day just to get up those stairs. And it would probably take them hours to get back down.
With my spine as it is, I would not physically be able to do it. So yeah, like that's just an ordeal. And I suspect that that's kind of part of the pilgrimage, is making this part the hard part.
Yeah, it was. And, there was something metaphorical about it because you get to the top and, you're really high up compared to the flatlands that you've been walking on up to that point. And so, you get to the top and you have a wonderful view of like the mountains of Shikoku in the distance. And you have like the outer neighborhood outskirts of Tokushima City in between. So it's like a really gorgeous view up there. It's sort of like, metaphorical of, you exert yourself on the Buddhist path and then you get to enlightenment. And that's where you can see everything. You're rewarded with, vision. And that was sort of reflected by this. And so it took me quite a while to get up those stairs. And I was very sweaty and very tired and very, very hungry and thirsty whenever I got up. But I made it up there just fine. And I stayed a while because I didn't feel like going back down. And so I was there for for a little while. And I saw the temple and did the rituals there. And then I started to go back down. And I got about halfway down when, just because of fatigue and soreness and having gone up not too long ago, my left knee buckled and twisted in a way that really hurt. And so it was what I understand to be a very mild LCL injury instead of ACL. So this would be lateral cruciate ligament instead of anterior cruciate ligament. Those are just fancy terms for one of the tendons or ligaments that holds your knee together. It's particularly the one on the outside that holds it together. And so it was just a very mild tear in that ligament, as far as I can tell. And so it became very painful to bend the knee to a 90-degree angle or further, which is actually crucially necessary for getting down a very steep set of stairs or a very steep hill. So that was really rough. That hurt really bad. And I had to sit halfway up and down the stairs for about half an hour before I could keep going. And so once that started to feel better from the initial injury, it was still sore, still painful to walk on, but I did have to get down because, the stairs took an unexpectedly long time, and taking a break on the stairs for my knee injury took an unexpectedly long time. And so I'm burning daylight because I have to be to where I'm going. I have to be to the inn that I'm attempting to stay at by a certain time. If you're too late, then, it's very rude, or the innkeeper is not there, or has, they've been expecting you at a certain time and you don't get there at that time. And so it's generally not good if you're too late. If you're within an hour or 2 hours and it's still business hours, that's not that big a deal. But if you said, I'm going to get there at 4 p.m. and you get there at 9:30 p.m., they're not going to be there, and that could be very bad, right? So I sort of felt like a rush to get over there. And I was staying near Temple 11, and so I walked through to Temple 11, which wasn't that far, thankfully. It was really hard to get down the stairs and down the hill, but I got to number 11, and I immediately, once I got to where I was staying, just laid face down in the hotel room in pain. That night, I stayed at Business Hotel Kamojima. Kamojima is a neighborhood in the outskirts of Tokushima City, and it's a funny name because it means Duck Island. So I liked that. That gave me a little bit of joy while I was walking in pain. So I got there to Kamojima and just sort of collapsed in the hotel and just sort of laid there trying to recover and trying to gauge whether I could walk, whether I needed to rest a few days, what I should be doing for the rest of the trip now that I'd hurt myself. I didn't really need medical attention. Like, I didn't need to go to a clinic or, stop the trip right then and there. But I probably needed to sort of like reassess. Can I walk the full distance tomorrow? What do I need to do to sort of feel better in the meantime? So I'm loading myself up on ibuprofen and stuff. And the next day, it feels mostly good enough to walk on, especially if I'm not bending at a 90. And so I checked to make sure that the topography of the next leg of the trip was sort of workable. And it was. There's no giant uphill parts or downhill parts, and there's not temples at the top of 333 stone stairs anymore. So I figured I could make it. So that day I sought to go from temple number 13 through 16. And it's important that I skipped number 12. I stayed near 11 and skipped 12. And the reason why is because 12 is actually a sort of mountain climb to get to. It is what is known in Japanese as a Henro Korogashi, it means a place where a pilgrim can fall. It's a place where the trail becomes uniquely dangerous for injury. And the part that is Henro Korogashi actually starts right behind 11, and I could see up the hill like the trail and how bad it would have been, going on an injured leg. It wouldn't have been a big deal for me to go normally in prime condition, but it was definitely something I wasn't willing to try on an injured leg. So I skipped 12 and went straight for 13. And so instead of walking out into the mountain and potentially hurting myself, this meant that I started the day with a train ride closer into Tokushima City proper. And so I went through 13 through 16 that day. And as I'm walking, I'm enjoying the temples and I'm meeting interesting people. Like, for example, I believe it was Temple 13, I met a Dutch lady from the Netherlands. And it was actually very similar to the South African couple. She was doing this because she had done the El Camino in Spain and found this. She was part of a Tibetan Buddhist meditation group in Amsterdam, but she didn't identify really as Buddhist. And she just found this and saw fit to go on it. So I thought that was really cool as well. We sat and talked for a while at temple number 13. But as I'm walking, my knee is just hurting worse and worse and worse and worse. And, I'm sort of being taken out of it by the pain. Like, I'm not able to really focus on like what I'm enjoying and what I'm experiencing about the pilgrimage, and I'm sure you can relate to this.
Yeah, pushing through pain like that is a lot of energy. Folks who haven't tried to do that before, like, really underestimate how much mental effort it takes to get through pain.
Yeah, it takes a lot of focus, and it just wears on you more than anything else. So, that whole day probably sapped me more mentally, emotionally, physically than any other day in my whole life. Because, not because the pain was that bad, but because walking through the pain and getting from A to B while hurting was just that bad. I've been lucky enough to not have to deal with pain that is that incorrigible for a huge amount of time. So that time it was a rough experience. So I got to where I was staying that night, which was another hotel in Tokushima. That night I was staying at a hotel that overlooked Tokushima City Station. So at the end of the walk that day through 16, I went to the train again and went a couple of stops down to sort of downtown Tokushima and stayed at a hotel there. Once I got there, it was the early-ish afternoon, and one of the first things I did after, of course, loading up on ibuprofen and whatnot, was to sort of check what the conditions of the trail were like for the next leg of the trip. Because I was thinking to myself, okay, I'm either going to have to start walking shorter each day, because up to this point I had been walking about 12 to 14 miles each day, or I have to just quit. I have to leave because I'm going to do permanent damage to my knee. And it was really hard to come to that decision, but I had been so miserable that day walking through all that. I just felt I needed to. So I checked, and to my understanding, getting from 17 through, call it 25, 24, the far south part of the southeast part of the trail, it was just going to get worse and worse and worse in terms of topography. There's going to be many more mountains to walk through, lots more up and down, and larger gaps between places to stay, larger and larger gaps between just any kind of resources. Like, oh, I've run out of ibuprofen, I need to go to a convenience store. Well, the closest one is 30 miles away. It's a super rural spot, a super rural sort of portion of the trip. And so that's when I made this sort of tough decision to be like, all right, I think that I have to go home and recover on this and come back and do the rest of the trip or another portion of the trip later on, because, this is just out of hand. Like, I can't afford to stay where I am here right now for the amount of time it would take to get back into condition for this upcoming portion of the walk. Like, I had planned in my original itinerary for over the course of the whole trip, 3 to 5, maybe even 7 days of rest where I'm not doing anything, just in case of emergency for this sort of exact situation. But, it was getting to the point where I could feel that it wasn't going to get better unless I sat on it, kept it straight, and kept it medicated for 10 to 14 days. And so, like I said, I made the difficult decision to return to Tokyo and then return home. Tokyo is my favorite city in the world. And so as a consolation prize, I sort of allowed myself to stay 2 nights in Tokyo in Shibuya, right above the famous Shibuya crossing. And so that was fantastic. I was able to enjoy being in Tokyo and doing Tokyo things without walking very much, staying off of the knee, eating really fantastic food again, but also not doing much. And then I returned home. And it proved true that it was going to take about 14 days for my knee to get better. I returned home on, I believe, 9 days. That would be April 5th or 4th. And so, yeah, so I got back on April 4th. And right now at time of recording, it's April 22nd. And my knee has only been feeling better for like a week or, 10 days. Go back before that, and it was still stiff and still painful and still hurting anytime that I walked on it too much or lifted something too heavy and stuff like that. So I definitely needed the time to recover. And ultimately, it was the right move to cut the trip off early. And so I made it through 15 out of 88 temples on this leg of the trip. And I do intend to go back and finish more of the trip at another time. And I'm going to be a lot more sort of forgiving to my body and to my condition to make sure I can actually get through whatever leg of the trip I choose to do. Because I guess I bit off more than I could chew with this aspiration to do the whole thing all in one go. And that was proven by my getting injured. So I think that next time I'm going to plan accordingly, but there will be a next time. And I still had a very enriching and transformative time while I was there. So, it wasn't all bad, but the schedule did change.
Yeah, that was the wise thing to do. Running around on an injured leg is a really good way to end up as wrecked as I am. So I'm glad you chose to do it that way. That must have sucked to have to make that call, but that was the correct call, because if you tried to push through it, there is a good chance that you wouldn't have made it and wouldn't have been able to come back later after doing permanent harm. So, yeah, it sucks, but life is like that.
Yeah, it is. But I still had a wonderful and amazing time. One of the most, I would say, transformative aspects of even just the short trip that I did do was that I spent most of the time that I was walking alone. Even though I spent some time on the first day with Takuto and with the South African couple and so on, most of the actual walking was by myself. Because, like I said, you outpace or are outpaced other people. And so, that means that most of the time you actually are by yourself, and you're walking through neighborhoods, residential areas during the workday, so people aren't really there. Or you're walking through very rural areas like farmlands or, even just like unclaimed land, that's just out there, not being farmed, not being lived on, just the land. And there's just like a paved path through it or something. So, you're really out there by yourself. And it's like unexpectedly, I don't want to say anxiety inducing, but unexpectedly, let's just say odd, to go from spending most of your life indoors to walking on like the flat plain between some mountains and being outside by yourself upright for that long. Like you start to feel sort of like you're going to fall into the sky almost. I've actually heard that if people travel too much in like the high plains in certain regions of the US or Canada, for example, if they travel too long, they can actually get kind of like a vertigo from being the tallest thing that you can see on the land in all directions. There are plains that are like in the Dakotas, for example, or in parts of Montana where, it's just grass. And so, the grass will grow to like, I don't know, your knee or above. And, you look in all directions and there's no topography, and you are by about 4 feet, the tallest thing there. And above you is just sky. nothing else. That can be a little bit sort of disorienting. And I didn't have that because there were mountains on the horizon, kind of on the rim of the valley of the flatland where I was. But it still was close because I was like, wow, I'm just out here exposed. I'm the only person for a while in all directions. I'm on this road and it's just sky, Nick, ground, and not really much else. And so that was a little bit interesting, but it was transformative in a positive way because it was an experience of like sort of coming to a feeling of singularity and of completeness. Not complete like, oh, my life is complete, but completeness in that like I am everything that I am and I have everything that I need. I have my backpack. I have, for emergencies, I have an internet connection. I have all the food and drink that I need. I have the shoes I need. I have my 2 feet to walk on. I have my 2 eyes to see with. It's kind of a unique and ineffable experience of, being all that there is and being all that is needed and having all that is needed all in one sort of instant. So I highly recommend that experience. If you can sort of feel that out sometime, if you're listening to this and you can go on a hike or a pilgrimage or something like that, where you can feel that about yourself, feel like complete and total self-sufficiency and complete aloneness and complete silence, but not loneliness.
Solitude is the word for that.
Exactly. Yeah. It was an amazing experience of solitude. And so I had a lot of time to just sort of think about stuff and reflect on stuff. I wasn't seeking entertainment via music in my AirPods or audiobooks on my phone or scrolling through stuff on my phone. None of that. I was just sort of going. I got to a point even where I wasn't looking at maps anymore. The path is very well marked for like the Shikoku pilgrimage, and it should be because people have been trying to walk it for 1,200 years, and so there's good signage. And so you get to a point where you don't even really need to have Google Maps open or have like an interactive Shikoku map open or anything like that. You just sort of are going. There'll be a little sign with an arrow that just points in a direction and it says Temple 14 is just that way. Figure it out. And you just go. You just walk until you hit Temple 14 or signage for Temple 14 or whatever. And so that was fascinating. I would just go for the longest period on the trip that I went. I was probably silent from, I want to say 6 a.m. until I went to sleep that night, really. I just didn't say anything to anybody because I didn't meet anybody on the road and I didn't need anything. I didn't do anything with other people. I was just sort of, I was in solitude and I was in silence. And so it was a very interesting place to be in mentally and physically. And, at the same time, I also did interact with other people and have good, social interactions, make good friends. I did make friends with Takuto, for example, and I got to practice a lot of my Japanese language and got to practice a lot of reading, a lot of speaking, a lot of listening. And so that was really important, really good and positive. And I also was taken care of by, wonderful innkeepers, wonderful families, wonderful people on the road. I had many moments where I was, pointed the right direction by somebody who could have been Kobodaishi, could have been Kukai, just like the legends say. And I'll take those experiences with me forever. And I hope to have more experiences like that when I go on later portions of the trip.
So it's a shame you couldn't get the whole thing done, but you got a lot out of it, and I'm glad that it went as well as it did until it didn't. And I'm also glad you made the decision to wrap it up before you did, lasting harm to yourself. So that's great.
I agree, yeah.
So as for the show, we are planning to head back to normal scheduling next week for the foreseeable future. I still have not edited anything on this new laptop yet, so we'll see if that actually works. I suspect it will. But everybody's plans have been messed up on this show, and oh well, at least we can get back to what we were doing before. I do still want to do the American Religion project that I was talking about last week's episode, but it is going to be on the back burner for a bit.
I still hope that that comes to fruition as well. I thought that was a great idea, and I would still love to see it. So hopefully we can get that off the ground and make that happen.
All right. Well, that was our update after everything exploded. At least we're able to get back to normal. So, yeah.
Yep.
Expect more of our usual content coming forward, and I think that's it. So thank you very much for listening, everyone.
Thanks for listening, and as bad as it was to end the trip early, it is good to be back.